Hello, everyone. I'm Evelyn. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you all. And I'm going to share the topic of the food imported and export compliance management. But first, I'd like to share some interesting data with you. This data will show you how important to make sure you are following the rules when exporting and exporting foods. Now, let's take a look at the pie chart. This set of data is obtained from our company's food sampling system. It's from the 2013 to this year. And so in the past 10 years from this data, we can see there are a variety of reasons for the unqualified of the important products. And such as the labeling don't meet the requirements and the shelf life has expired. What we noticed from this data are the main reasons behind the unqualified important products. These reasons may be summarized into the following four aspects. The first risk is the access complaints, and the second is the ingredients complaints, and the third is the risk of the indicators complaints, and the last is the labeling complaints. And we also face some problems and risk during the export process. And we also use our company's database to summarize it. This data range is also from the 2013 to this year. Taking the EU as an example, it has identified several risk points for export products that are similar to the unqualified information that imported products. These risks can be categorized into the four aspects. It's the same with the import product. So the topic I share with you today covers these four aspects. The first part, we have the confirmation of the eligible for access, which includes the national access and the manufacturer registration. And the third part, the second part, I will share some confirmation about the product complaints, and where we have the discussing the ingredients and indicators and labels. The third part will be a case study, and I will show the general process for the pre-packaged food in importing. All right, let's get the start. Firstly, let's talk about the confirmation of the eligible for access. For the entry qualifications, I divided it into two parts, the 1.1 national access and the 1.2 manufacturer registration. Basically, before importing or exporting, we do need to check if the exporting country has obtained access to the importing country. For the 1.1 national access, I will introduce the China's imports, and then we can move on to the China's export to other countries. And when it comes to importing, the JCCC will evaluate and review the food safety management system and the food safety status in the exporting countries or regions. The aim is to determine whether they can guarantee the safety of the food being exported to China and if they meet the necessary requirements of the laws, regulations, and the state standards. For high-risk foods, the JCCC will conduct evaluation and reviews. The countries and food categories that pass the assessment will be guaranteed access. And the country's name and the food category will be listed in the related list. We can find the aquatic product, dairy product, and the plant-derived product in the catalog of the food exported to China from the countries or regions that meet the assessment and examination requirements and have the traditional trade with China. And before last year, the meat, beef product, kittens, and the bird's nest are also listed in that catalog, but this year, the JCCC adjusts the content. For these four foods, You can check them on the website that I displayed on the page. If you also need to check the eligible for importing fresh fruits, grains, fresh vegetables, plant-based seasonings, coffee beans, and cocoa beans, you'll need to query the access qualifications in the list as well. In addition, we also should pay attention to the relevant access and the prohibition lists, such as the list of the animals and their products are prohibited from being imported from the country or regions where animals disease are endemic. For example, due to the occurrence of the sheep pox and goat pox in Bulgaria, the import of sheep, goats, and their related products from Bulgaria to China is currently prohibited. In this page, I want to show you the foreign food which is not being allowed to enter China. It released in September, and there are total 294 benches of the unqualified information in this notification. Among them, there are 116 benches seafood that are not eligible for access. For countries like Indonesia, Pakistan, and Japan, and so on, they have been informed that they don't have access qualification. Before exporting, we can check whether the product has obtained the national access qualification mentioned in that catalog. We just need to locate the country name and the list is, say, if the seafood name in the list. If we find the category's name, it means that the seafood can be exported to China. Here are some simple tips for ensure qualification before exporting to China. First, before exporting, we need to check if the national access qualification has been obtained. If yes, the related products can be imported. However, the qualification isn't forever. It may be lost if the requirements are not met. We also need to pay attention to the access status and the warning notifications. If the products or the countries is prohibited in the list, it cannot be imported. Finally, if there is a bilateral agreement between the two countries or some special inspection and quarantine requirements, those products must be monitored according to the special requirements. And when it comes to exporting, let's take an example of oyster sauce being exported from China to the EU. We all know that oyster sauce contains some animal-derived ingredients, but the product contains animal-derived ingredients that are not approved by the EU, so it was notified. But in the past, there seems to be no problems with exporting oyster sauce. But things changed in the 2021 when the EU made some big changes to their import requirements for such products. Now, regardless of how much animal-derived ingredients in the food, the EU requires that these ingredients must come from the countries approved by the EU. If not, the product cannot be exported to the EU. So how can you find if the EU has approved the import of the animal-derived products? Well, let's now turn to the next page. The EU has clear requirements, mainly including the two regulations, EU 2017-625 and the EU 2016-429. These regulations serve as the basis for the EU's list of the approved countries. By referring to this list, we can determine whether our country's products can be approved by the EU. Apart from these two laws, the EU also requires the products contains animal-derived ingredients to have the national residue monitoring plan. Non-EU exporting countries need to develop and submit this plan to the EU. If the country doesn't have the plan, its products will not be allowed to export it to EU. Now let's turn to the next page, 1.2 manufacturer registration. In China, the JCC issued the specialized regulation decree 248 in the 2021, and the Article 4 indicates that overseas manufacturers seeking to export to China must obtain the JCC registration approvals. It also requires that overseas production, processing, and storage manufacturers exporting food to China must be registered. The Article 7 stipulates that the 18 categories food that need to recommendations by their competent authorities. And last year, the JCC adjusted the scope. The frozen fruit has been added, so there are 19 categories food need to be recommended by the competent authorities. And according to the Decree 248, all food items need to be registered for import into China, except the food additives and the related products. However, if the food additives are used as the minor ingredients, they do need to be registered. The food categories food is divided into the two categories, 19 categories and the 19 categories. The 18 categories are considered as the high-risk food and must be recommended by their local government. And the non-18 categories can be registered by the manufacturer themselves or their agents. Now, let me explain briefly to how to register. Firstly, we need to create an account on the official website. And please note that the URL on the screen is the only official link. Then follow the user menu to complete the registration process. And the most important step in the registration process is to confirm the product catalog. We can do this by using the HS code, which can be found in the product type query section. And we can search for food category simply by using the corresponding HS code. If the official recommended registration column indicates yes, it means that the product requires the recommendation. And when it comes to the exporting, the US has the specific requirements for the registration overseas manufacturers. On the screen, you will see the notification from the US FDA regarding Chinese products. In this case, it's about the vitamin and mineral supplement, and the product has been notified because it hasn't been registered with the FDA. Any rejected shipment must be either destroyed or returned within 19 days of the FDA notification. So it's very important to be registered with the US FDA. The process for the registration within the US FDA is similar to that of China. First, we need to create an account on the FDA website, and once that's done, we can process to fill in and submit requirements information following the step-by-step, and then we can finish the registration. And another important requirement during the FDA registration process is the company identification number, also referred to as the Dun and Bradstreet number or DUNS number. And once confirming the national access qualification and manufacturer registration, there may be a national requirements for importing certain products. For example, when importing infant formula milk powder to China, the product formula registration is required. Some countries in the Southeast Asia will involve some food product registration requirements. Now, let's move on to the second part, confirmation of the product complaints. In this part, I divided it into 3 parts. And the first one is the ingredients complaints, and the second is the indicators complaints, and the last is the labeling complaints. And now let's get started with the first one. The ingredients complaints can be both difficult and a risk. To ensure the complaints, the first step is to accurately classify the product. Please see the case study here. You can see some information along with the picture. Now, let's determine whether it should be categorized as the chocolate product or the cookie. Correct classification is important because if the food is classified incorrectly, it can lead to the incorrect review of the product indicators, labels, and other requirements. And during the ingredients review process, how can we find the correct classification? And so, to make an accurate judgment, it's necessary to consider many factors such as the main ingredients, processing technology, consumption methods, label information, and more in order to determine the specific classification. Now, let's take a look at the ingredients information here. The main ingredients for this product consist of 13% wheat flour, 25% shortening, and 20% chocolate, and so on. Then we can take a look at the product standards that can be applied. There are JB 9678.2 and JB 7100. According to the first product standards, the chocolate products must contain at least 25% chocolate. Based on the ingredients information, we can see that the products didn't meet the requirements. So, the product should be classified as the cookie instead of the chocolate products. And here are some tips for classifying product categories. Firstly, we need to understand the scope of the application for the standards. This will help us to determine if the food classification fits within the standards. And secondly, the main ingredients of the product are examined to determine its catalog. We use the ingredients information to judge if the product meets standards requirements for its catalog. Thirdly, we need to take into the consideration the processing, which is also described in the the product standards. By combining the products processing with the standards, we can determine if the products meet the requirements of the standard. Lastly, we should be aware of the regulatory differences. This refers to the fact that each country has the different monetary mood, and the many class similar and it may lead the similar products differently due to the local cultural background. After confirming the food classification, you may want to know what the kind of the ingredients allowed into China. Well, here is a list of the ones you can use. We use the ordinary food raw materials, approved novel food raw materials, and as well as the traditional both food and Chinese medicine materials, health food raw materials, food strains, food additives, and the nutrition fortification substance, and so on. And when exporting food products, there can be risk associated with the ingredients complaints. For example, the cheese nuts. Well, they can be used as the food ingredients in China, and there may be issues when exporting them. Foreign countries often use the different regulations and the supervision modes, and this is especially true for the products with the Chinese characteristics. Therefore, it's important to assess whether the ingredients comply with the regulations of the target country. For example, the products was exported from China to the EU was notified because it contains the cheese nuts. In the EU, the cheese nuts are considered as the unauthorized novel food ingredient. When determining if a food ingredient can be used, you can consider the following tips. Firstly, check if the target country has a database for food raw materials. If such a database exists, it can be used to confirm ingredients complaints. Secondly, look for food product standards. If the food has the specific product standards, it indicates that it can be used as a food raw material. Thirdly, check if the target country has the database of novel food ingredients. This can be provide information on whether the ingredients is approved for use. In case where regulations or standards are unclear, you can rely on the additional information such as the notification data from the target country. This can help determine if the raw material can be used as the food ingredient. Determining the complaints of the additives is generally easier compared to the raw material. However, there can be still issues, such as the use of the food additives is out of range or beyond the limit. For example, let's see the difference limit requirements for the titanium dioxide in variety countries in this table. We should follow the requirements of the target countries to use these food additives. And when we determine the complaints of food additives, we can consider the following tips. Firstly, we usually confirm the complaints based on the NIS number if the target country has an NIS number for the additives. It makes the confirmation process much easier. And if there is no NIS number available, we can check the specification of the food additives. By comparing the specification of the additives with those specified by the target country, we can determine if they are the same. Furthermore, it's also helpful to refer to the regulations or standards concreted on the food additives in the target country. And this regulation can provide the valuable information and guideline for the insurance complaints. Now let's move on to the next part, the indicators complaints. The food indicators include the physical and the chemical indicators, microbial contaminants, pesticide residues, and so on. Now let's use an example to discuss the indicator complaints. If you plan to export Chinese milk powder to the EU while also selling it in China, there are several indicators you need to pay attention to. Firstly, you should identify the product standards for milk powder in both China and the EU. This will help you ensure that your product meets necessary requirements in both countries. Additionally, you should consider the relevant general standards and regulations that apply to the milk powder. It refers to the content in this table. Then sort out the specific index limits that the products need to be meet. It's better to summarize them into a table for comparison. Pay attention to these indicators highlighted in red, as these may have the different requirements between the China and EU. For the remaining indicators, ensure that the product meets the requirements. The tip for this section is the indicators of products should be in accordance with the regulations of the target country. In another word, the products should be meet the product standard requirements of the target country. And if there is no specific product standards, it becomes crucial to focus on controlling the quality of the raw material and meeting common standards requirements. It's worth noting that some countries may clearly mention that they can refer to the CAC standards as the guideline. The next part is 2.3 labeling complaints. And Lisa will give a detailed explanation of this part from the point of the view of regulations and the standards later on. And so I won't go into detail about it here. And I just want to show some unqualified status. Every month, the JCC issues notification of the unqualified enters. In September, there are 37 batches of the food labels that are unqualified, and the labels have almost 13% failure rate. And this figure shows the number of the unqualified labels for imported for this year. However, the notification from the JCC lacks details reason for these figures. And based on my experience, some of the problems include incorrect nutritional information and illegal declarations on the labels. And for this line chart, it shows the number of unqualified labels on Chinese food exported to the US. As we can see, almost each month has a significant number of the unqualified labels leading to the entry failure. To minimize the risk associated with labeling, it's important to pay attention to label complaints. This involves reviewing and understanding all the labeling requirements in the target country, and it's essential to make necessary adjustments to labels to make the specific requirements. This ensures that the product labeling complies with the regulations of that country. And let's move on to the final part, the case study. And this case is about the prepackaged general food beverages. This part I will mainly talk about the manufacturer need to do before importing, since the most complaints work need to do before imported. Firstly, they need to ensure that the product is compliant with all relevant regulations. For producing beverages, it's important to comply with the National Food Standard, National Food Safety Standards, GB 7101. And this standard lays down the rules on which raw materials are allowed and sets the physical and chemical requirements for the product. Additionally, the beverages also need to comply with the other general standards, such as the W718 for labels and the GB 14880 for nutritional information, and so on. And for the overseas manufacturer registration, the beverages belong to the non-19 categories. This means that the manufacturer can choose to register themselves or hire agents to access them. This process can be completed through the China International Trade Single Window platform. And in the product tab query page, we can find the suitable category according to the HS code. Then go back to the application for registration page. And to find the right catalog, click the icon to continue the following steps. And there are 4 parts need to be filled. Once the registration is successful, we will get the registration number, which is 18 digits code. According to the Decree 248, it's required to label the Chinese requirements number on both an inner and outer packaging of the food labels. And after completing these steps, you can continue the following import steps. Sorry. And in other words, the import and export complaints can be divided into the 2 parts, access complaints and product complaints. Access complaints includes the national access, manufacturer registration, and the special requirements. And the product complaints usually include the ingredients complaints, indicators complaints, and the labeling complaints. And so it's very important to do the export and import complaints management. And so please follow the requirements to carry over the importing and the exporting activities. And that's all for my sharing. Thank you for your listening.